I'm delighted to be here and listening to this group of people. What strikes me is that we need to remember our history. Because if you don't remember your history, you don't do the right things in the future. 25 years ago, we were Detroit. We were the basket case of America. I remember there were some billboards that said, "The last person out shut the lights off." We had become the second oldest county in America, Dade County being the oldest county. And it wasn't because old people were retiring to Pittsburgh. It was because 30 to 50,000 people a year were leaving this region. We had the largest population loss of any metropolitan area in the history of America. Between 1970 and 1990, almost 500,000 people left the region. And they were our kids. Paul was our failure. And that's who was leaving. The people that didn't see a future for themselves in Pittsburgh were leaving. And that was the challenge we faced, is that we needed to take a city that had a trend of 50 years of decline to turn that around. That is a painful decision to change. Machiavelli wrote about it 600 years ago when he talked about the change is the most difficult thing to do because those that are where they are know what they have, and those that are going to benefit from that change aren't sure what it means. And that's where we were. We were a city that, in effect, was managing decline, and we were failing. And let me give you an example because I think this is a specific one when I see Google t-shirts and others, is that East Liberty in 1995 was a failed urban renewal project. The two poorest neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, Lincoln, Larmer, and Homewood, are on one side of East Liberty, and the two wealthiest neighborhoods of Pittsburgh, Shadyside and Squirrel Hill, were on the other side. And the people from Squirrel Hill and Shadyside were not going to East Liberty. It had failed. And there was a big old Sears building there that the Sears had abandoned 15 years earlier. And we bought that site in thinking about how to reimagine Pittsburgh. And we said, what are going to attract rich people and poor people back to East Liberty to do anything? And we said it was a Home Depot. Does that make sense? But in 1996, there was no urban Home Depot in America. They were at where they, would you imagine, on the interstate. And so we called up the Home Depot people and we said, why don't you think about locating a store in East Liberty? And they literally laughed at us and said, it's not where we would put a store. And so I called up the mayor of Atlanta and I said, tell me about the two guys that own Home Depot. And he said, Bernie Marcus particularly is very philanthropic and very active in national Jewish activities. And I called up David Shapiro here in Pittsburgh, and I said, could you invite Bernie Marcus to come to speak at one of the Jewish dinners in Pittsburgh? And Bernie Marcus a few months later came to speak, and we had a reception for him in Squirrel Hill. And my bodyguard I had at the time, who was a police officer, walked up to Bernie Marcus and said, we're kidnapping you. This is a true story. And we took Bernie Marcus. Bernie Marcus said, really? And I said, give us a half hour and you can make our dreams come true. And so Bernie Marcus came with us to East Liberty. And as we drove across the Highland Avenue Bridge into East Liberty, he said, this is not where we would put a store. But Bernie Marcus, a couple of days later, called me after that dinner and said, we'll take a risk with you. We'll put a Home Depot in East Liberty. And then a young developer, Steve Mercedes, came and said, I think we might be able to do the same kind of thing in an abandoned warehouse with Whole Foods. Now, for those of you from California, they're on every block. But there was no Whole Foods in Pittsburgh. The closest one is probably Washington, D.C. And so we work with Whole Foods and bring Whole Foods to East Liberty. And guess what? The people from Shadyside and Squirrel Hill are shopping in East Liberty. And then we began to build some housing. And we took on some old publicly subsidized but badly managed housing, and Target is in one of those footprints. And then guess what? Google came to East Liberty. So there's a connection you might not know between Home Depot and Google. Because I don't think Google would be in East Liberty if Home Depot hadn't gone there first. That's the story of how do you put together. And I give you that as an example about being proactive, of reimagining a neighborhood that had failed to become something other than what it was. And so that continues to be the challenge for Pittsburgh. And what concerns me, having been away a number of years and traveling to many other cities, is that we're not hungry enough now in Pittsburgh. We're sort of comfortable, or we're getting comfortable. We need to be hungry still. By no means are we being successful. I found it ironic in the discussion I've heard so far today that we're at the University of Pittsburgh, but it's never been mentioned. The conversation has been about Carnegie Mellon University. Why is that? Pitt gets 4 times more dollars in research annually than CMU does. So this is, for me, the sleeping giant. The University of Pittsburgh and UPMC is the next economic driver for Pittsburgh or not. It, I think, depends on the community and the leadership of this institution to make a difference. If I said to you, what university in America gets the most research dollars, what would you say to me? Stanford? UC Berkeley? Harvard? Johns Hopkins. Do you think of Baltimore as a tech center of America? Johns Hopkins gets $1.8 billion a year in research. And they have, for whatever reasons, and I don't have the time to go into it, have chosen not to become a tech center. CMU is the real deal. The first person I ever heard to mention the idea of the universities as the steel mills are collapsing, that universities could be the economic drivers of Pittsburgh was Dr. Sarrett, who was the president of CMU. And none of us understood what he meant. We thought of universities as places where people maybe do some research and you go to get educated, not thinking them as economic drivers. And we had to rebuild the culture of Pittsburgh. We were a very paternalistic city. We were a city of big unions and big corporations. We were not entrepreneurial. We had to create the culture that you're enjoying now, and that's why you need to continue to be hungry, to continue to build that culture and to think about what happens if University of Pittsburgh and UPMC have the same kind of driving force of creativity and technology that CMU does now. The other thing, I've had an opportunity over the last 10 years of leaving as mayor to travel a lot. I've been to 38 cities in the last year. And there's a couple of really unique things in Pittsburgh. And I think the most unique thing are our partnerships. The universities, the city, government, the foundations. We were, as Paul said, a rich city once and then became a poor city. But that rich city left a legacy of a huge foundation community. And they have been critical to be an effective venture capital for us to shape, to take risk in the civic realm. You enjoy the riverfronts, I'm sure, the trails that we've built, and how many of you have ridden from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. And if you do that, that doesn't happen by accident. When I became mayor, there was a mile and a half of riverfront park in Pittsburgh. Now there's almost 30 miles. That happened because of a remarkable partnership of how to make that happen, and the foundations were a very important part of that. So as I end, I want to say to you, remember our history. Remember that you're building on a remarkable story. I think Pittsburgh is the best story in America right now. And I say that having been to a lot of cities. It's the best story in America in the terms that we, in a very intentional way, made a decision to become something other than what we were. We're still in that. We're like a teenager trying to figure out what we want to be. We're not there yet. And you all can be part of building on that legacy and making a decision about what we want to be. Keep pushing. Keep reaching. Don't be comfortable. Good luck.